Alright, just a brief overview of the startup process to hopefully help you solve some startup problems is just understanding a little bit more about how the boot process starts. So let's just take us a little bit slower. First of all, the startup BIOS turns control over to your master boot record program stored in the first sector of your hard drive. Then that master boot record program searches the partition table looking for an active partition, which Windows calls the system partition. If it finds, or then it finds and loads your master or Windows Boot Manager program in the root directory of this partition. If the master boot record program cannot find the boot manager or cannot turn over operation to it, one of these errors message appears. You might see one that says like Windows operating system error or Windows loading operating system failed to load invalid partition table. That's telling us where we need to go look at. Now the boot manager is going to do the following. It's going to read the settings in your boot configuration data file. We just call this the BCD file, the boot configuration data file. The next step, there's like 5 steps here. It depends on your entries in the boot configuration data file. Option 1, you're going to have normal startups that are not going to have multiple operating systems, so there's not going to be a dual boot. And no menu appears, and boot manager finds and launches the Windows bootloader stored in your with System32 folder. Now option 2 here, if the computer is set up for a dual boot environment, boot manager displays the Windows boot manager screen, and it lets you choose which operating system you want to load. And you can have multiple operating systems on it, so we don't just have to call it a dual boot. You could have 3 or 4 operating systems there. And if the user presses the space bar, the boot manager screen appears. If that Windows boot manager screen appears, you have it might display some advanced boot options where you can do such tasks as repair your computer, launch into safe mode with either networking or command prompt. You can do debugging mode, lots of different options here. Now another option is if Windows was stopped abruptly for some reason, the Windows error recovery screen comes up. And here you have the options similar but not as many, in which you can start Windows normally, or you can go into safe mode with or without networking, or you can go into safe mode just using command prompt. Alright, so now we'll get back into our Windows loading system. If you go to WinLoad, once it gets to WinLoad, this is responsible for loading the Windows components. And it's going to do some things like, for a normal startup, it's going to load into memory the OS kernel. As I talked about before, the NTSO kernel.exe. We have that right here. WinLoad loads into memory the system registry hive, as I mentioned that before as well. WinLoad is going to read the registry key that was just called the HKey local machine system services, and the drivers are not yet started for this. It's going to read data from our HKey local machine system, and that tells us if the OS, if the user wants to start the OS using that last known good configuration when it last loaded without any issues. And then our NTSO kernel.exe there, it's going to do different things too, such as activate the haul and read more information from the registry. The kernel will then start critical services and drivers that are configured to be started by the kernel during the boot process. And after your kernel starts and all the services and drivers are configured to load during the boot, it starts the session manager, which runs in user mode. This is that smss.exe you might have seen if you've ever been poking around in your task manager. And the session manager is going to start the Win32 subsystem that displays all of your graphics and that splash screen, the Windows 7 flag. Or if you're using a Vista, then you might just see that Vista progress bar or the splash screen for Windows 8. Now when you see this flag or this splash screen, you know that the Windows kernel has loaded successfully. You're not going to get any blue screen of death errors at that point, generally. And then it's going to start your runtime subsystem and get you into user mode. Next, winlog.exe is going to start your service control manager, get all your services started, and bring on that local security authority process to ask for any credentials to log into your PC. This is usually where you will see that screen that has your name and is waiting for your password. If there are any group policies that are occurring in the background, those will be applied, and then once you log in, you will have your permissions that were set up for you and be able to perform your daily tasks in your Windows operating system. That's a lot that's going on, so make sure you look through the material, go through the different charts here, and get real comfortable with how the Windows operating system loads from the time you start a boot to the time you're able to use your mouse and keyboard and be able to use Windows as it is designed for.